If someone had told me that a trip to Italy would destroy my marriage, I probably would have laughed in their face. But as the taillights of the rented SUV faded into the night, leaving me stranded in a strange town, I understood. Some cracks can never be mended. I stood there, clutching my small handbag, listening to their mocking laughter still echoing in the cold wind. Part of me wanted to believe this was just a cruel joke. The other part, the trembling yet clear-headed part, knew they weren't coming back. My name is Violet Morgan, 29 years old, American, raised in the suburbs of Seattle. I married Chase Morgan, a successful architect 6 years older than me, someone my family and friends once thought was the golden son-in-law. If they had witnessed Chase and his college friends abandoning me like this, they might have thought differently. This trip was supposed to celebrate the 10-year friendship between Chase and his best friends, Tyler, Luke, and Ben. A yearly tradition I reluctantly joined. I knew I didn't belong in their world. Middle-aged men, heavy drinking, loud laughter, and cruel jokes. But I went because Chase begged me to. Because I still believed marriage meant sacrifice. That afternoon, at a small cafe by Piazza San Lorenzo, I gently reminded Chase not to drink anymore. His fourth glass had already turned his eyes bloodshot and his voice slurry. Instead of listening, he exploded. "Trying to control me again, Violet," Chase growled, slamming his drink onto the table, causing several nearby Italians to turn and stare. I stood up, my face burning with shame. I just wanted to go back to the hotel. I wasn't trying to pick a fight, I just wanted to leave. But before I could, Chase grabbed my arm, dragging me onto the cobblestone street, where Tyler and Luke were standing, laughing hysterically. "Your wallet, phone, passport, they're all in your bag, right?" Chase asked, his voice dripping with a sarcasm I'd never heard from him before. Before I could answer, he shoved the lightweight bag into my hands, giving me a cold, cruel smile. "Someone as smart as you can figure it out, right?" Then he turned around and climbed into the driver's seat. Tyler rolled down the window, giving me a thumbs up like some sick joke, before they sped away, leaving behind dust and laughter echoing through the darkened town. I stood frozen. My mouth was still open, ready to say something, but who would listen? Who would care? The nighttime air in the small town of Volterra, whose name I hadn't even fully learned to pronounce, suddenly turned thick and frightening. The ancient rooftops and winding streets that had looked so picturesque by day now seemed like cold traps. Locals seated at sidewalk tables stared at me with pity. Some whispered quietly, but no one came forward. I rummaged through my handbag, a thin wallet containing about 65 euros, an old lipstick, and a dead phone. No passport, no credit card, no one beside me. I gave a bitter laugh, a sharp, involuntary sound, a reflexive shield. "They're just trying to scare me. They'll come back," I muttered, as if reassuring myself, but with each passing minute, each gust of cold wind slapping my cheeks, that fragile hope crumbled further. 1 hour passed. 2 hours. The night swallowed the town. I wandered through the streets, my mind reeling. If any hotel had still been open, I would have checked in. But here, everything closed early. The weak yellow lights from windows gradually dimmed. A small bank peeked from under an old red-tiled roof. Locked. A silent church, cloaked in darkness. Also locked. No one around except stray cats and the faint, distant footsteps of locals heading home late. The humiliation began burning in my chest like a wildfire. Chase wasn't drunk. He was sober. He meant to do this. And Tyler, Luke, Ben, they all laughed. I thought about my life before, how Chase had slowly convinced me to give up my beloved career in interior design, how he managed the finances because he was better at it, how my friends slowly drifted away because he always found excuses to keep me from meeting them. I hadn't seen the signs, or maybe I had, and lied to myself that it wasn't serious. Now it was crystal clear as the cold, lonely moon hanging over Italy tonight. I found a shabby inn near the square, its inside lights flickering weakly. The owner, a small elderly woman with pity sparkling in her eyes, looked me up and down. "Solo per una notte?" she asked, her voice raspy. I nodded. She held out her hand, signaling for money. I handed over all 60 euros, keeping back 5 euros just in case. She took it, nodded, and led me up a creaky staircase. My room was a tiny space with a rickety single bed and a small sink. The smell of mildew clung to everything. But at that moment, I had no energy left to complain. I collapsed onto the bed, still wearing my dusty clothes, and for the first time in years, sobbed like a child. There was no one left to save me, no one responsible but myself. And through the humiliation, a thought suddenly pierced my despair like a knife. If they thought I would break, they were wrong. I woke up in the stifling room, morning light piercing through the rotting curtains like needles into my eyes. My head throbbed, my throat was parched. Last night I had cried for everything, for betrayal, for my foolishness, for the wasted years beside a man who saw me only as an accessory. I checked my phone. Dead. No messages, no calls. No one was looking for me. Chase had surely blocked my number the moment he left, laughing with his friends. As for my family, the thought flickered briefly, but I pushed it away. I'd rather die than hear my mother's sighs and her judgmental, "I told you so." I dug through my handbag, counting the remaining money over and over. Exactly 5 euros. Too little to do much. My stomach growled, but hunger wasn't my priority anymore. I had to get out of this place before hope ran out completely. Wandering the square, I found a small pawn shop tucked between two old stone buildings. Its wooden door hung ajar, with dim light inside making the place seem even gloomier. I stepped inside, each step heavy as lead. An elderly man, small and white-haired, looked up from the counter. His eyes scanned me, stopping at my left hand, where my wedding ring glistened. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled as I slid the ring off. The ring Chase had given me on our 5th wedding anniversary, promising a lifetime together. A promise now as empty as a hollow tin can rattling in the wind. "Quanto?" I asked, using the little Italian I knew. He shook his head, pointing to a cold number on a slip of paper. 400 euros. I knew it was worth far more. The diamond ring had cost nearly $5,000, 0 cents, but I also knew I wasn't in a position to bargain. I nodded, biting my lip to keep from crying out loud. Clutching the cold pawned receipt, I stepped back into the street. Now I had enough money to leave Volterra and leave my old life behind. I slumped down on the church steps nearby, inhaling deeply. I turned on my phone with the last bit of battery. The screen flickered weakly to life. My parents' names topped the contact list. One tap, one plea for help, and I would be safely home, wrapped in my family's arms, enduring their pity for the rest of my life. I looked at my finger, now bare where the ring once was. No, I couldn't go back like a failure, like an abandoned child running home to cry in her mother's arms. I scrolled down the screen, swiping past my contacts. None of them were a safe place for me anymore. I opened the map on my phone, searching for the cheapest route, a night bus to Rome. From there, I would figure it out. Go anywhere, as long as it was far away from this past. I tore the pawn shop receipt into tiny pieces and tossed it into the trash. It wasn't just about selling the ring, it was about severing the last tie binding me to Chase. As the bus slowly rolled out of Volterra, I looked through the window, watching the red-tiled roofs and cobblestone streets fade into the mist. No more tears, no more begging, only a numbing silence and a small flame quietly burning in my chest. For once in my life, I had no one to lean on but myself. The bus swayed along the mountain roads, the streetlights few and far between. I clutched my empty backpack tightly, my whole body tense. Other passengers dozed off, but I stayed awake, my eyes wide open, chewing on the fear and anger swirling inside me. I thought about Chase, I thought about Tyler, Luke, Ben, the grown men with rotten hearts. I thought about all the times I had compromised, swallowed my sighs, and held back my tears just to maintain a perfect-looking family. No more, never again. When the bus stopped at the final station, it was dawn. Rome greeted me with damp, chilly air and chaotic rhythms. I stood in the middle of the station, streams of people rushing by on both sides, no one paying attention to a girl with messy hair, wrinkled clothes, and a fist tightly gripping the last few euros. My heart pounded wildly. I could have easily collapsed right there. Or I could start over. I remembered one thing. I still had something Chase couldn't control, something I had never entirely lost. Willpower. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and lifted my head. Across the street, a bus sign pointed toward the Civitavecchia ferry terminal, where ships traveled across the Mediterranean. I had no plan, no one was waiting for me, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I walked toward the terminal, fear and hope twisting inside me like powerful gusts of wind. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I would choose my own path. The ferry ride to Greece lasted more than 12 hours, and I moved like a lost ghost among the crowds of vacationers. The harsh sunlight reflecting off the sea made me squint in pain. Every blast of the ferry horn, every shout of the passengers felt like knives ripping through the thin shell I was trying desperately to maintain. When we docked, I stumbled off the ferry, clutching my worn-out handbag. In front of me was a tiny coastal town, white houses stacked up the hills, red-tiled roofs blazing under the sun. A place so unfamiliar that I couldn't even pronounce its name correctly, Agios Nicola. No friends, no family, no plan. Just me and a few crumpled euros shoved into the bottom of my bag. I walked for hours, dragging myself across dusty roads, past groves of silvery olive trees swaying in the wind. The sun scorched my skin. My throat was parched, the water bottle long empty. Every step felt like dragging stones, but I kept moving forward, like a sleepwalker clinging to the last scraps of will. When the sun was high overhead, salty sweat dripped from my temples into my stinging eyes. Black spots danced in front of me. And then the ground tilted beneath my feet. I didn't even feel myself falling. I only heard a dry thud echoing in my ears before everything went black. A strange voice pierced the darkness, soft yet firm. Koklamux sinexis. Someone flipped me over. Rough but warm hands touched my cheeks, gently shaking me. The raw scent of earth, olive leaves, and human sweat hit my nose, pulling me out of the suffocating void. Blinking painfully, I saw the face of an older woman. Sun-darkened skin, deeply wrinkled, dark brown eyes filled with concern. She held out a small water bottle. I drank the first sip like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline, the icy water burning down my parched throat and making me cough violently. "Oh, now," she said, tapping her chest, then pointing at me, raising her eyebrows. I rasped out, my voice hoarse. "Violet." Elena smiled, a kind smile like an old fairy godmother, then motioned for me to stand. My entire body went limp, legs trembling as if ready to collapse again. But she helped me up with surprising strength from her small frame. We trudged slowly up a dusty slope toward an old stone house nestled under the shade of olive trees. Every step was a battle with myself, but I clung to Elena's bony but steady arm until the scent of toasted bread and herbs flooded my senses, pulling me back from the abyss. The kitchen inside that house was small and dark, but filled with the warmth of real life. Bundles of rosemary and thyme hung from old wooden beams. A clay pot bubbled over a wood-burning stove, releasing the rich aroma of stew and ripe tomatoes. Elena pushed me down onto a battered wooden chair, then disappeared into a side room. I sat there, shivering from both cold and exhaustion, my head spinning like a boat lost in a storm. The faint rational part of my mind screamed, "You don't even know who she is, you're in a strange countryside." But the other part, the part that was exhausted, drained of all trust in the world, urged me to let go. After a while, Elena returned with a towel and a simple cotton dress. She shoved them into my hands, pointing toward a wooden door behind the kitchen where I assumed the bathroom was. In broken English, she said, "Rest, then eat." I nodded, too drained to protest. The cold water shocked me awake, but also cleared my mind a little. When I changed into the plain dress, I caught sight of myself in a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. A hollow face, hair matted with sweat and dust, dark circles under my eyes so deep they looked like bruises. I barely recognized myself. Violet Morgan, the girl who once lived in a luxury apartment in Seattle, who once wore expensive heels and attended cocktail parties, was now just a tired, solitary shadow in a foreign land. I took a deep breath, pulled myself away from that reflection, and returned to the kitchen. Elena placed a large bowl of soup in front of me, chickpea soup with carrots and greens, simple but fragrant. I whispered, "Thank you." Elena smiled, sitting down across the table, watching me eat as if she could feel the gnawing hunger in every fiber of my body. Each spoonful of hot soup seeped into the empty spaces inside me. After days, I finally felt like I wasn't completely invisible anymore. After the meal, Elena pointed to a small room with a wooden bed and a worn wool blanket. "Sleep," she said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. I walked into the room and collapsed onto the bed, my breathing heavy but deeper. Outside the window, the Greek sky shifted from brilliant orange to deep navy. Far away, the sea gently lapped against the rocky shore, a soothing melody like the first embrace I had received after endless days of being lost. And during that dark stretch of time, I fell asleep without being consumed by the darkness. No one was abandoning me anymore. I had found a place to start again on my own. I woke up to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere beyond the olive trees. Morning light glittered through the small window, casting reflections on the rough white walls. This simple room, the wooden bed, the old wool blanket, the small table by the wall, was now my new world. A strange place, but quieter than any I had ever known. In the kitchen, Elena bustled over the wood-burning stove, her old cotton dress swirling lightly with every move. She looked up and smiled warmly when she saw me. "Come, eat," she said, her broken English full of warmth. On the table were crisp toasted bread, pure olive oil in a small glass jar, and a few ripe tomatoes. The rustic aroma filled the kitchen like a gentle invitation. I sat down shyly and ate as if it were the last meal of my life. As I chewed my third piece of bread, an older man stepped in from the backyard. He was sturdy, his skin leathery from the sun, and he had a thick silver mustache. His narrowed eyes lit up when he saw me. Elena introduced him by pointing. "Nikos, my husband." I jumped up awkwardly, sticking out my hand. Nico simply laughed, his handshake strong and firm like an ancient olive tree trunk. Elena and Nikos exchanged a few words in Greek, so quickly that I couldn't catch anything. Then she turned to me, patting her chest and then patting my hand, a simple gesture. "Stay." My chest tightened with emotion. No signatures needed. No conditions. Just an invitation through actions. And I understood, if I wanted to, I could start over here. Work began that very morning. Nikos led me to the olive fields tucked behind the house. Ancient olive trees, their trunks twisted like living sculptures, stretched all the way to the horizon. "They lies," Nikos said, nodding toward the heavy-laden branches. I nodded, not sure I completely understood, but ready to learn. He handed me a small wooden rake and a large woven net. Elena, quick and skillful, showed me how to spread the net under the tree and gently rake the branches so the ripe olives would fall. And just like that, under the blazing sun, I started learning. At first, I was ridiculously clumsy. I raked too hard, snapping branches. I raked too lightly, leaving olives untouched. Nikos laughed, patiently correcting my movements little by little, while Elena only smiled, shook her head, and patted my shoulder every time I fumbled. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt, my hands blistered and ached, and my muscles stiffened with each motion. But instead of feeling humiliated or helpless, I felt alive. Every scratch, every drop of sweat soaking the rough net was proof that I still existed in the rawest, truest way. In the afternoon, after gathering the nets full of olives, Elena led me back to the kitchen. She taught me how to prepare a simple dinner, homemade flatbread, brushed with olive oil, topped with slices of tomatoes and a pinch of fresh herbs picked from the garden. No written recipes, no measurements, only hands, eyes, and instincts. I watched her knead the dough, her movements steady, flexible, like water flowing around stones. I mimicked her, of course, making a mess, the dough sticking to my hands and scattering on the floor. Elena giggled, swiping a dab of flour onto my nose like I was a little child. Good, she cheered when I finally managed to shape a decent piece of dough. That laughter, simple and pure, soothed the dark corners still lingering inside me. In the days that followed, I gradually blended into the farm's rhythm, like a small tree taking root. In the mornings, I helped Nikos harvest more olives, rake barley, and repair fences knocked down by the wind. In the afternoons, I learned from Elena how to cook traditional Greek dishes, lentil soup, spanakopita, cucumber and feta salad. In the evenings, the three of us sat under the porch, sipping homemade wine, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains. The sea breeze whipped my clothes, but I no longer felt like I would be swept away. I had learned to stand firm, even barefoot, even with calloused hands. I also learned to weave baskets from willow branches and make olive oil soap with Elena. The hands that once only typed on keyboards and lightly applied makeup were now rough, strong, and capable of creating things that smelled of earth and wind. Every scratch, every bruise on my body was no longer a mark of injury. They were badges of existence, proof of the journey I was on, a journey no one could take away from me. One night, after stacking the latest batch of soap, Elena sat across from me, the oil lamp casting a warm golden glow on the deep lines of her face. "You strong," she said slowly, piecing together each English word. I gave a hoarse laugh, shaking my head. "I'm broken," I whispered. Elena didn't argue. She simply placed her hand over her heart, then placed it over mine. Her heart beat. Mine did too. "Broken, still beat," she whispered. A single tear slipped quietly from the corner of my eye. Not out of pain, but because after so many months I realized I was still whole, in a way Chase would never understand. Outside, the wind whispered through the olive groves, playing an endless lullaby. And I, Violet Morgan, was learning how to listen to it. The days at the farm were no longer just about survival. They gradually became pieces of a real life, a life I was building with my own hands. Dawn in Agios Nicholas came early and fiercely. By the time the first rays of sunlight pierced through the olive groves, I was already standing outside, gripping my wooden rake, ready to start a new day. My body, once aching at every move, had become supple. The new calluses hardening on my palms were silent proof that I was changing. Nikos, the quiet man with eyes sharp as steel, started assigning me more complicated tasks, checking the ripeness of the olives, overseeing the harvest of small sections. As I became more proficient, he gave a slight nod, his once stern gaze turning into genuine respect. "Golly," he said one morning, simple, but his voice deeper than usual. "Good." Just one word, but it felt like I had been awarded an invisible medal. In the afternoon, I followed Elena to the village market, where wooden carts overflowed with vegetables and white tarps flapped in the breeze. The air was filled with the aroma of toasted bread, goat cheese, and olive oil, mixed with the cheerful laughter of old women weaving baskets under ancient olive trees. Elena, clutching a basket of fruit, led me around to introduce me to everyone. No need for many words. A nod, a smile, a warm handshake, each small gesture weaving an invisible thread connecting me to them. An old potter named Manilus pressed a rough clay bowl into my hands. "A giacena," he said, his mischievous smile peeking out from under a gray mustache. "For you." I hugged the bowl to my chest as if embracing a piece of a new homeland I had just touched. That evening, under the warm, flickering light of an oil lamp, Elena taught me how to make soap from olive oil. I stirred the thick mixture in an old iron pot, breathing in the rich scent of herbal essential oils. "Slow, gentle," she reminded me, her wrinkled hands guiding every motion. When the first batch of soap finally set in the wooden mold, I couldn't help but let out a joyful cheer. Elena patted my shoulder, her eyes sparkling with pride. No one demanded perfection. No one nitpicked every little mistake. Here, effort was recognized with nods, gentle touches on the shoulder, and simple but warm meals. Sometimes I went out to the fields with Nikos on nights when the moon was bright. He taught me how to tell the difference between sea winds and mountain winds just by lifting my face and feeling them. He showed me how to listen to the rustling olive branches to predict the next day's weather. No textbooks needed, no degrees, just listening and trusting the natural world. Nature, she speaks, Nikos said once, his voice resonating through the night. I sat silently, my fingers playing with the wild grass at my feet, feeling the heartbeat of the earth under my palm. It was a new kind of language, a kind of understanding that went beyond words. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. My body was now used to working outdoors from dawn until the moon rose. My hands were strong, my shoulders broader, but the biggest change wasn't physical. It was in the way I walked. Firm, steady, no longer tentative. It was in the way I looked in the mirror, not seeing a lost soul anymore, but a woman who knew exactly where she was and why. One afternoon, after a simple dinner, Elena pulled me out onto the porch. She placed a rough wool scarf into my hands, clumsily embroidered with the image of an olive branch. Gia Sena, she repeated the words Manilus had once said. For you. I stared at the simple gift, my chest tightening. Not because of its material value, but because it carried the heart of someone who had cared for me when I had nothing. I hugged Elena on my own. She looked surprised, then wrapped her arms around me tightly, the familiar scent of herbs making my eyes sting. Izayuk Jagaya, she whispered. You are family. I nodded, tears silently streaming down my sunburned cheeks. That night, sitting on the porch, I looked up at the Greek sky filled with stars. The salty sea breeze played with my hair, whispering like a lullaby. Somewhere out there, Chase was probably still living his life, where control and reputation were everything. And I, Violet Morgan, was living a life no one else had planned for me. A life I was planting with my own hands, olive branch by olive branch. Loaf of bread by loaf of bread, friendly greeting by friendly greeting at the village market. And the strangest thing was, I had never felt so rich. I was hanging olive nets out in the yard when Elena called me into the house, waving the old cell phone. She pointed at the flashing screen, her eyes shimmering with a hint of worry she couldn't hide. Violet, phone. I wiped my hands on my apron and took the phone. Since arriving in Agios Nikolas, I had barely used it except to look up Greek words or snap a few pictures of the farm. Life here had been so peaceful, I had forgotten the outside world still existed. When I opened the email app, a familiar name hit me like a blow. Chase Morgan. I froze, my whole body going cold. The subject line was short, cold. I know where you are. I clicked it open, each word slicing through my breath like a sharp blade. Violet, you've been hiding long enough. I hired a private investigator. I know you're in Greece, in a small coastal village. I'll be there to bring you back. My flight lands in Athens this Thursday. Be ready. Chase. My hands trembled. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. No greeting, no apology. Just a cold command, as if I were lost property he was coming to reclaim. I collapsed onto a wooden chair, hollow inside. All those months of working the fields, learning new skills, rebuilding myself. All those nights under the porch, listening to the sea's comforting whispers. Suddenly strangled by the ghost of my past. I shut my eyes, gasping for air, gripping the rough edge of the table to keep myself from shattering. Elena came over and sat across from me. She didn't ask. She simply waited. After a long moment, I looked up, my voice ragged. Chase, he's coming. Elena squeezed my hand gently. When? Thursday, 3 days. Her face darkened, deep lines forming across her forehead. Elena turned away, pulling a thick envelope from a drawer and setting it down in front of me. I blinked in confusion. For you, we waited. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside was a business partnership contract written in both Greek and English. My name, Violet Morgan, printed clearly alongside Elena's and Nikos's. 1/3 ownership of the farm. Not just a guest, not just someone doing chores, a partner, family. I ran my fingers, trembling, over the deep red seal stamped at the bottom of the document. Elena placed her hand on the table, her gaze steady. You choose, Violet. You have place here. No chase. Only you. Her words, though simple, rang out like a bell shattering the darkness, swallowing me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring out at the vast black sea. The question repeated endlessly in my mind, would I let Chase dictate my life once again? On one hand, fear twisted in my gut. Chase had money. He had power. He had ways to force me back. But on the other hand, here, I had built something he could never buy. True freedom. I picked up the old pencil on the table and signed my name on the contract. My hand did not tremble. For once in my life, I chose myself. The next day, Nikos drove me into town in his old truck. We stopped at the only lawyer's office in the area, a small whitewashed house with a simple sign hanging from an iron gate. Katerina, a silver-haired lawyer with thick glasses, greeted me with a knowing smile. She was ready. We drafted the necessary paperwork, divorce papers, documents protecting my share of the farm, everything needed so that if Chase appeared, he wouldn't easily drag me away. I signed each page, listening to the scratch of the pen like blades cutting through the final ties to my old life. When we finished, Katerina squeezed my hand. You strong, Violet, very strong. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. On Wednesday evening, I packed a few personal belongings, the rough wool scarf embroidered with an olive branch that Elena had given me, a bottle of freshly pressed olive oil, and a small photo of me with Elena and Nikos under the golden olive trees. I didn't pack a suitcase. I wasn't running. I was waiting. When I stepped out onto the porch, Nikos was sitting there polishing his wooden rake, and Elena was mending the nets. They both looked up at me, their faces calm, as if they had known all along I would never return to that old life. 3 days? 3 days to transform from an abandoned girl to a woman who could defend herself. When lightning flashed across the distant horizon, I knew the storm was coming. But I no longer shrank from fear. I would stand tall, whether the wind howled or the past came crashing like a tidal wave. Because I was no longer alone. And because I knew my life was truly mine. The day Chase arrived, the Greek sky was startlingly clear, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I stood in front of the little stone house, wearing the olive green cotton dress Elena had sewn for me by hand. My hair was neatly pinned up, my calloused hands firmly gripping the contract and divorce papers tucked in my pocket. Nikos and Elena stood silently on either side of me, like old soldiers guarding their small fortress. No one spoke, but their presence alone gave me strength. The sound of an unfamiliar engine broke the midday stillness. A shiny silver sedan pulled up at the farm gate, its polished wheels caked with red dust. Chase stepped out, his expensive travel clothes doing little to hide the frustration he was trying to suppress. He straightened up, scanning the simple surroundings with disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom that I, the wife he had so carefully molded, was living in a place like this. When his gaze finally settled on me, I saw the shock flash across his face. I had changed far too much from the woman he once controlled. Sun-kissed skin, a strong frame, eyes lit with a determination Chase had never witnessed before. I stepped forward, my voice calm. Hello, Chase. He pulled off his sunglasses, his cold blue eyes narrowing. Violet, you really do look different, he muttered, a weak, awkward laugh escaping him. I didn't reply. I just stared at him, letting the silence between us speak volumes. Enough, right? Chase took a step closer, reaching out like this was just another petty argument. I'm here to take you home. Let's forget this craziness. I calmly pulled the folder from my pocket and held it out to him. These are the divorce papers, fully translated. All you need to do is sign. Chase's face darkened instantly. You can't be serious, he said, his voice dropping dangerously low. I nodded, each word sharp and clean as a blade. Dead serious. He gave a short, bitter laugh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Violet, be realistic. You're giving up everything, the house, the bank accounts, the social connections, just to live like some farmer? I looked him squarely in the eyes, my voice even. I left behind what I didn't need: pretense, control, and a life built in someone else's shadow. Chase clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. You'll regret this, he growled. When you're older, when life gets hard, you'll remember what you threw away. I smirked. Maybe, but at least it'll be my choice, not yours. Behind me, Nikos stepped forward, his gaze sharp as tempered steel. Leave, he said bluntly, even though Chase couldn't understand Greek. But the message was far too clear to need translation. Chase took a step back, his eyes flickering between me, Nikos, and Elena, three small figures as solid as stone walls. He knew he had lost. There would be no negotiations, no compromises, no room left for pity. With a sharp, angry exhale, Chase shoved the folder into his coat pocket, climbed into his car, and sped away, leaving behind a cloud of red dust. I stood still, watching until the car was just a tiny silver speck on the horizon. A strong gust swept across the olive fields, whipping my dress and hair around, but I didn't waver. Eleanor gently squeezed my shoulder, her smile as warm as early spring sunlight. Free, she whispered. I laughed, a hoarse, broken laugh, bursting out like rain after a long drought. Freedom. No more invisible chains. No more controlling hands closing in. Only me. And a world that had never felt so wide open. That afternoon, I sat under the ancient olive tree with Elena and Nikos, drinking homemade wine and eating crispy toasted bread dipped in fragrant olive oil. Nikos raised his glass, his eyes sparkling in the golden afternoon light. Family, he said. Elena added warmly. Together. I clinked my glass with theirs, my heart swelling with a sweet, fierce emotion. Not everyone is born into a family. Sometimes it's the choices we make that create the strongest bonds. I had chosen. And this time, I knew I was right. Chase was gone, leaving behind nothing but a faint trail of dust in the fading sunset. I stood quietly at the farm gate, still clutching the signed divorce papers, feeling lighter than I had in years, like breathing freely for the first time after being trapped inside a gilded cage called perfect marriage. Nikos placed a heavy but steady hand on my shoulder. Elena smiled warmly, her small hand gently squeezing my wrist. No words were needed. The entire world at that moment was pure peace. An old chapter had closed, and I, Violet Morgan, had finally turned the page by myself. In the days that followed, life at the farm returned to its usual rhythm, as if the storm named Chase had never passed through. Each morning, I went out to the fields with Nikos, learning to check the soil's moisture by grabbing a handful of earth and feeling its texture between my fingers. In the afternoons, I cooked with Elena, made soap, and aged olive oil in large wooden barrels stored in the cool cellar. Only something inside me had changed. Every time I rolled up my sleeves and welcomed the morning sun on my tanned arms, I no longer felt like I was running from my past. I was building something truly my own. I once thought freedom was a luxury reserved for those braver, stronger than me. Now I knew freedom starts with a single choice, a decisive choice. One morning, Nikos led me to a patch of wild land behind the farm, a small garden overgrown with weeds and scattered stones. He pointed and said, "For you." I frowned. "Me?" Elena nodded, her eyes sparkling under the sunlight. "You grow, your land." My chest tightened with emotion. Without a word, I knelt down and began pulling up the stubborn weeds with my bare hands. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my shirt stuck to my back. But I didn't stop. I would plant new seeds here, just as I was replanting my life. Weeks later, the first vegetable rows had sprouted lush and green: tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, and fragrant herbs. I built a small trellis for the grapevines, using old olive branches for the roof. The villagers began to grow familiar with me. Maria, the cheesemaker at the market, slipped me an extra block of soft goat cheese without charging more. Yorgos, the baker, started calling me affectionately Violet Moo, our Violet. Even at the weekend market, when I nervously sold the first bottles of olive oil labeled Liles Agapis, olives of love, the customers didn't buy out of politeness. They bought because they trusted me, because they saw me as part of this land. Not a guest, not a stranger, but a true member of their community. One summer night, I sat with Elena and Nikos under the porch, a glass of homemade wine in my hand, looking up at a sky jeweled with stars. Violet, Elena called softly. I turned and saw her holding a small object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it, revealing an old, rusted key. For your house, she smiled, her eyes shimmering with trust. My house. I accepted the key, my hands trembling. A small object, but heavy with meaning. A real home. A place where I belonged. Hot tears welled up, but this time not from pain. This time it was because I had found what I had spent so many years blindly searching for in all the wrong places: a family. When autumn came, the first seasonal winds carried the raw, earthy scent of ripening olives. I stood in my small garden, looking over the heavy grapevines and rows of green vegetables. I thought back to the day I collapsed on the dusty road, exhausted and hopeless. If I had given up that day, if I had gone back, if I had let Chase drag me back into that gilded cage, I would never have known this feeling, the feeling of true freedom, the feeling of living without permission, the feeling of building a life with my own two hands, a life I was proud of. And I knew, even if life brought more storms and tempests in the future, I would never fear again. Because I had walked through hell and emerged on my own, without anyone pulling me out. I was Violet Morgan, and this is my life. Not Chase's, not anyone else's. It belongs to me. From a woman abandoned and lost in a forced marriage, Violet found the courage to stand up and choose a new path for herself. Through days of hard labor, building each small piece of her life in the Greek countryside, she not only regained her self-respect, but also found a true family, people who loved her unconditionally. Violet's story reminds us that freedom is not given, it is earned through courage and determination. What do you think about Violet's journey? Would you have the courage to let go of the past and choose freedom like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the channel to explore more emotional family stories ahead.